My mother called me a selfish son the night I chose the woman I loved over the family that had used me for years. Then she smiled for our engagement photo, turned around, and called my fiancé poor, black-skinned, and trash. My father stayed silent. My brother smiled. They had no idea the woman they were humiliating owned the very doors they would soon beg to enter. I used to think keeping peace meant staying useful, even when my own family treated my love like something dirty. But the night my mother called Zara trash, I realized silence was not respect anymore. It was permission. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from tonight, because this is the story of how I finally learned which doors deserved a key. My mother called me a selfish son the first time I refused to hand her my obedience. A week later, she called the woman I loved trash in the same living room where I had fixed her sink, her porch light, and my father's blood pressure machine. They thought Zara was too poor, too dark-skinned, too far beneath the Rook family name. What they did not know was that the woman they looked down on owned the foundation my brother would soon beg to enter. But before they lost access to everything they wanted, I had to understand how little they thought I was worth. It started on a Monday evening in Marietta Ridge. I had just finished a long shift at Grady North Systems Center, and my shirt still carried that mix of metal, dust, and machine oil that never really washed out on the first try. I was halfway to my truck when my phone buzzed. Mom. No hello. No, are you busy? No, did you eat yet? Just, the kitchen sink is acting up again. Stop by before it gets late. Then a second message. You still have the house key, don't you? Use it. That was how it worked in our family. My older brother Dacre handled conversations, dinners, and anything that made my mother smile in public. I handled leaks, rides, bills, and anything heavy enough to make her remember I existed. I told myself it would take 20 minutes. It never took 20 minutes. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the porch lights were already glowing against the neat brick front of the house. I let myself in, like I had done for years, with the key they called for emergencies. Somehow, everything became an emergency when they wanted my hands. Mom pointed toward the kitchen without looking up from the mail. Sink's under there, she said. And when you're done, check the garage door. It made that grinding sound again. Dad sat in his recliner with the television low. His blood pressure monitor rested on the side table beside a pill bottle. He lifted 2 fingers instead of greeting me. I got under the sink. The cabinet smelled like old wood, damp towels, and pipe sealant. My knee pressed into a cold spot on the floor. I loosened the trap, tightened the connection, tested the water, then did it again because the first fix did not hold. While I worked, Dacre came in through the side door, wearing a clean suit and expensive cologne. Mom's whole voice changed. There he is, she said, bright and proud. How was the meeting? Long, Dacre said. Real work never ends. I kept my eyes on the pipe. A few minutes later, Mrs. Mavis Bell from next door stepped onto the back porch. She had known us since I was a teenager. How's your youngest doing these days? She asked Mom. Mom laughed softly. Oh, he helps around. My wrench stopped for half a breath. I was 36 years old. I supervised systems that kept hospital wings running. I had left work still wearing boots because my mother said the sink could not wait. But in her mouth, I was still the boy with a wrench. I turned the pipe tighter and said nothing. That was the safest thing I had learned growing up. If I objected, I was sensitive. If I was tired, I was dramatic. If I said no, I was ungrateful. When I finished, Mom handed me a paper towel like she was tipping a waiter. Your father has an appointment next week, she said. You can drive him. Not can you, just you can. Dacre checked his watch. Wish I could help, but I've got actual deadlines. Dad didn't look away from the TV. I packed my tools and walked out before my face said what my mouth refused to. Outside, I sat in my truck with the engine off. The porch light glowed behind me, warm and familiar, almost kind. My hands still smelled like sealant. I rubbed my thumb over the cracked glass of Grandma Lenora's old watch. She had left it to me when she passed. It wasn't worth much to anyone else. Scratched band, faded face, one small crack near the number 4. But it was the only thing from that house that never made me feel small. When I was a boy, Grandma Lenora used to sit on that porch with a glass of sweet tea and tell me, being the youngest doesn't mean your life belongs last. Back then, I thought she was comforting a child. That night, I wondered if she had been warning a man. I looked back at the house, at the clean windows and trimmed shrubs, and the family name my parents protected like fine china. Then I thought about Zara Vay. I thought about her calm voice, her steady kindness, the way she listened as if every word mattered. I wanted my family to see that. I wanted them to meet the woman I loved and understand that I had not been pulled away from them. I had simply found someone who saw me standing there. So I let myself believe one more foolish thing. I believed that if my family could just meet Zara properly, they would see the woman I saw. I was wrong before she even set the peach cobbler on the table. Zara arrived at my parents' front door carrying a peach cobbler in both hands, like she was bringing peace to a house that had never learned what to do with it. I had picked her up after work that Thursday, and the whole drive to Marietta Ridge, I kept telling myself to relax. She noticed anyway. Zara always noticed the quiet things. "You're gripping the wheel like it owes you money," she said. I laughed, but it came out thin. "They can be a lot," I told her. She looked out at the neat brick houses, the trimmed hedges, the porch flags moving in the evening breeze. "Most families are." That was the kind of grace she had. She gave people room before they earned it. When Mom opened the door, Zara smiled and held out the dish. "My grandmother taught me never to walk into a home empty-handed." Mom took the container, glanced at the plain lid, and smiled the way people smile when they are deciding where to place something they do not value. "Well, isn't that thoughtful?" she said. Then she set it on the far end of the counter without opening it. I saw it. Zara saw it too. She did not blink. She only stepped inside and thanked my mother for having her. Dad was in his recliner, one hand on the armrest, the television murmuring in the background. Zara walked over and said, "Mr. Rook, it's good to finally meet you." Dad shifted like standing would cost him too much. Zara noticed and pulled the side chair a little closer so he would not have to lean forward. He gave her a nod. "Evening." No thank you, no warmth, just evening. Then Sable came in from the hallway, dressed like she had been waiting for a camera. She looked Zara over in one quick sweep. Coat, shoes, ring, hands. "That's a sweet ring," Sable said. "Very understated." Zara smiled. "I like simple things." Sable's mouth curved. "That's refreshing." Dacre came in behind her and shook my hand first, hard enough to make a point. Then he turned to Zara. "So Tabian says you work in education?" "Education, investment, and community development," Zara said. Mom heard community and stopped listening. Sable heard it and looked down at Zara's coat again. Dacre leaned back like he had already found the box he wanted to put her in. During dinner, Zara answered every question with patience. Where did she grow up? How long had she lived in Atlanta? What did her family do? Did she see herself staying grounded after marriage? That word bothered me. Grounded, as if she had floated into the room needing their permission to land. I tried to help. I told them about a school renovation project she had organized. I talked about how she listened to people before she made decisions. I told them she could walk into a room full of strangers and make the quietest person feel heard. Mom nodded like I was reading from a brochure. Sable took one bite of dinner and said, "That's nice. Some people are very passionate about those local projects." Local. Small. Beneath them. I heard it, but I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive. Maybe they were just awkward. Maybe they needed time. Maybe I wanted that so badly I was willing to sand down every sharp edge I saw. When the night ended, Zara squeezed my hand on the porch. "They're cautious," she said. "That's one word for it." She looked at me carefully. Do you want to try again? I did. That was the sad part. I still did. So that Sunday, we went back for the engagement dinner. Mom had brought out the good glasses. The dining room smelled like roast chicken, lemon polish, and old expectations. Dacre and Sable were already there. Dad wore a button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel, which told me Mom had staged the evening from top to bottom. When Zara and I announced the engagement, Mom froze for one brief second. I caught it because I had spent my life studying her moods the way other men studied weather. Then her smile spread wide. "Well," she said, standing, "we should celebrate." Dacre raised his glass. "To Tavian and Zara." Sable smiled for the room. Dad shook Zara's hand, but he did not say, "daughter-in-law." He did not say, "welcome." His fingers touched hers and let go. Mom stepped beside Zara and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Once you marry my son," she said, "you are part of this family." Something in my chest loosened. I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so badly that for a minute, I let myself ignore the way Zara's shoulders stayed still under Mom's hand. Then Mom waved her phone. "Let's get a picture. Stand closer, honey. We want you to look like you belong." Zara moved closer to me. I slipped my arm around her waist. Mom stood on her other side, smiling like a woman who had never had a cruel thought in her life. Dacre stood tall behind us. Sable tilted her head just enough to look polished. Dad stood there like the photo was another chore. The flash went off. It should have been a memory. It became evidence. After dinner, I drove Zara home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I talked too much, the way a man does when he is trying to outrun his own doubts. "They'll come around," I said. "Mom just needs time." Zara watched the streetlights slide across the windshield. "Do you believe that?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I need to." She did not argue. She only rested her hand over mine. I had almost made it out clean when I realized my keys were not in my pocket. I had set them on the kitchen counter while helping Mom carry dishes. Zara waited by the front hall while I stepped back inside. The house sounded different after guests left. No silverware, no careful laughter, no family performance, just voices from the kitchen. Mom's voice came first, and this time there was no sweetness in it. I stopped with my hand on the kitchen door frame, and my mother's voice cut through the house like a knife wrapped in velvet. "She does not belong in this family." For a second, I forgot why I had come back inside. My keys were sitting on the counter, maybe 10 feet away, but the distance felt impossible. Dacre's voice followed hers. "Tavian had to know people would talk. He can act surprised all he wants, but come on." Sable gave a quiet little laugh, polished and careful. "That ring was sweet, I suppose, but she doesn't exactly look like our world." Then my mother said the words I would hear again and again later, no matter how hard I tried to bury them. "They'll say he dragged home some poor black girl and called it love." My fingers closed around the edge of the doorframe. I had watched that same woman place her hand on Zara's shoulder and call her family. I had smiled for a photograph beside her. I had let myself believe the room had softened. Now the untouched peach cobbler sat somewhere in that kitchen, and my mother was talking about the woman who made it like she was dirt tracked onto a clean floor. Dad's voice came lower than the rest. He looked like a street drifter beside her. That one hit different. I looked down at my work boots, the same kind of boots I wore when I fixed their sink, lifted their boxes, cleaned their gutters, and showed up after every call. They needed my labor, but they were ashamed of what that labor looked like on me. I did not walk into the kitchen. Not because I agreed, not because I was weak, because I had spent most of my life preventing explosions in that house by making myself smaller. My body knew the old rule before my mind could argue with it. Behind me, Zara said softly, "Tavian?" I turned. She was standing near the hallway with her coat over one arm. She looked at my face, then passed me toward the kitchen. She did not ask again. "We should go," I said. Her eyes changed, but she did not press me. She only nodded, slipped into her coat, and followed me out. The drive back to Atlanta was quiet enough to hear every turn signal. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say every ugly word before it could grow between us. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Zara rested her hand near mine on the console. "When you're ready," she said. That was all. No demand, no guilt, just space. By Monday morning, I was back at Grady North, standing in a service corridor with a panel open and a wrench in my hand. Pipes, wiring, pressure gauges. Those things made sense to me. When something leaked, I found the source. When a motor failed, I replaced it. Family damage did not come with a manual. My phone rang while I was tightening a valve. "Mom." I stepped into the hall and answered. "You always have time to fix everyone else's problems," she said. "Now fix the one you brought to this family." I closed my eyes for 1 second. Zara is not a problem. She is if she turns you against your own parents. "I heard you last night." A pause. Then, instead of shame, my mother gave me control, dressed as concern. "We were being honest. You're blinded right now. People will talk, Tavian. Your father barely slept." "That doesn't make what you said right. You're being a selfish son." There it was, selfish. The word she saved for any moment I tried to become a person instead of a tool. I thought about every doctor's appointment I had driven Dad to, every repair I had handled after work, every bill I had quietly covered when Mom said things were tight. She had reduced me to help in front of Mavis Bell, and now she was calling me selfish because I wanted a life of my own. Across the corridor, Harlan Pike stopped with a clipboard in his hand. He had worked maintenance longer than I had been alive. "You all right?" he asked after I ended the call. I put the phone in my pocket. "Family." He studied me for a moment. "That call took more out of you than the repair did." I almost smiled. "Something like that." The phone buzzed again before I could turn back to the panel. Mom's message filled the screen. "Your father hasn't been right since dinner. If you still care about this family, you'll come home tonight." I stared at the words until the letters blurred. I did not know yet if Dad was truly in trouble or if my mother had found another handle to pull. But I loved my father, and that was exactly what made the message work. By the time I reached my parents' living room, the blood pressure machine was already sitting on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. Dad was in his recliner with a blanket over his knees. His face looked tired, but not panicked, not gray, not twisted in pain. The television was off, which somehow made the room feel less like a home and more like a place where a verdict had already been written. Mom stood beside his chair with one hand resting on the back of it. Dacre leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed. Sable sat near the hallway, quiet, polished, watching everything like she had bought a ticket to a private hearing. I stepped into the room slowly. "What happened?" I asked. "Does he need urgent care?" Mom did not answer the question. "Your father has been upset since dinner," she said. "He barely slept." I looked at Dad. Chest pain? Dizziness? Shortness of breath? Dad shifted under the blanket. "I'm tired, Tavian." "That's not what I asked." Mom's eyes sharpened. "Do not come in here acting like this is some workplace checklist. It's a health question." "It is a family question," she said. On the coffee table, beside the monitor, was a folded sheet of paper. Numbers were written in Mom's neat handwriting. Some high, some not. The pill bottle beside it had been turned so the label faced me, like I was supposed to feel guilty before I even sat down. Then Mom said it. "If that pressure turns into a heart attack, remember who brought it into this house." She did not raise her voice. That made it worse. The words reached straight back to a hospital night years earlier. Dad had been kept for observation after a scare, and I had sat in a plastic chair with a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Mom had cried on the phone until I left work and drove across town. Dacre had sent a text saying he had an early meeting. When Dad woke up, the first name he asked for was Dacre's. I still stayed until morning. Mom knew that memory lived in me. She knew exactly where to press. Dacre pushed himself off the fireplace. You need to ask yourself if one woman is worth putting Dad through this. One woman? I said. Her name is Zara. Sable folded her hands. No one is attacking her, Tavian. We're just saying this has been hard on the family. You all attacked her when you thought I was gone. Mom's mouth tightened. We expressed concerns. You called her poor. You said people would talk. Dad said I looked like a street drifter beside her. Dad looked toward the window. That silence hurt more than a denial would have. Mom stepped closer. Parents are allowed to worry about who their son brings into the family. Worry does not sound like what I heard. Dacre gave a short breath through his nose. You're making everything about race and pride. This is about reality. She is not our world. Our world? I repeated. Mom cut in before I could say more. You will not live with that woman while your father is in this condition. I stared at her. There it was. Not concern. Control. Zahra and I are building a life, I said. Not under this family's name, Mom answered. No decent son runs off with a woman his parents have not accepted. Dad finally spoke, low and worn. Don't make your mother beg you to do the right thing. I looked at him, really looked. I still loved that man. That was the problem. Love can become a handle in the wrong hands. Has Dr. Sloan been called? I asked. Did she tell you to go to the ER? Mom's face hardened. This is not about hiding behind doctors. Look at your father. I am looking at him. Then act like you care. For a few seconds, I almost surrendered. I thought about calling Zara and asking for time. I thought about saying we should slow down just to calm the house. I thought about swallowing every word from that kitchen because it would be easier than standing here while my mother held my father's health over my head. If I spoke up, I would be blamed for breaking the family. If I stayed quiet, Zara would pay the price for my peace. I'm not ending the engagement tonight, I said. Mom's face changed just enough for me to see the anger beneath the concern. I left before she could dress it up again. Outside, I sat in my truck with the door closed and the engine off. The porch light shone behind me, the same way it had the night Mom told Mavis I helped around. My hand went to Grandma Lenora's watch, but even that old cracked face could not quiet the guilt right away. So I did the only thing I trusted myself to do. I verified. I texted Dacre. Did Dr. Sloan say ER? Is Dad having symptoms? 3 minutes passed. Then his reply came in. No ER. Sloan said monitor it and keep the appointment. Dad's fine. Mom just said that because he was upset. I read it twice, then a third time. Relief came first, but it did not stay clean. It turned heavy, bitter. My father's blood pressure was real. My mother's story about it was not. She could not convince me Zahra was wrong, so she tried to make me afraid that loving Zahra would kill my father. I started the truck, but I did not pull away right away. I sat there watching the house I had fixed piece by piece, and something inside me stopped asking for permission. I would not end my engagement, but I would go back one more time with Zahra. I would ask my family for the simplest thing a grown man should be able to ask for: respect my future wife. I thought if Zahra and I stood in that room together, my family might finally understand where the line was. Instead, my mother stepped over it with both feet. Zahra sat beside me on my parents' sofa 2 nights later, calm as ever, while my mother looked at her like something that had been dragged across the carpet. I had told Zahra what I heard behind the kitchen door. Not all at once. I started with the softer pieces, if there was such a thing. Then, when she stayed quiet and waited, I gave her the rest. She did not cry. She did not call them names. She only sat across from me at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and said, "Then we should be honest in return." That was why we were there. Not because Zahra needed to prove herself, not because my family had earned another chance, because I needed to know I had spoken clearly before I walked away from people who had raised me. Mom sat in the chair across from us. Dad was in his recliner, The blood pressure machine had been moved back to the side table, but I still saw it. Dacre stood near the fireplace, and Sable leaned against the hallway wall with her arms folded loosely, as if she were above the whole thing. I took a breath. "I heard what was said Sunday night," I began. "I heard the words you used about Zara. I heard what Dad said about me." Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Mom lifted her chin. "Private concerns should not be dragged into a performance." "This is not a performance," I said. "Zara deserves respect. I am not ending the engagement. You do not have to understand every part of our relationship, but you do have to treat her like a person." Dacre gave a tired laugh. "Here we go." Sable's voice came smooth and cool. "No one said she was not a person, Tavian. We are simply asking how she expects to fit into a family with traditions and standards." Zara turned toward her. "I did not come here to take Tavian from you. I came because he still loves you enough to try." That sentence should have softened the room. It did not. Mom's expression changed in that small way I knew too well. The polite mother disappeared, and the woman who measured worth by appearances took her place. "You may have fooled my son," she said to Zara, "but you have not fooled me." "Mom," I warned. "No, you brought this into our house. Now we will speak plainly." She looked at Zara from coat to shoes. "You want to move into his life, separate him from his family, and call it love." Zara's posture did not break. "I want peace, Mrs. Rook, but peace has to include dignity." Dacre pointed toward me. "You hear that? She already talks like she's in charge." "I am different," I said, "because I am finally seeing clearly." Mom stood. "You think clarity means disrespecting your parents? You think marriage gives you permission to throw away the people who made you?" "No," I said. "It gives me responsibility to protect the person I choose." Her face hardened. Then she looked directly at Zara. "You are trash, dressed up in a nice coat." The room went still. Zara lowered her teacup to the saucer. The small click of porcelain sounded louder than my mother's insult. For a moment, I felt every old habit pulling at me. Calm it down. Keep the peace. Don't make Dad worse. Don't embarrass the family. Then I looked at Zara. She had walked into that house with cobbler, kindness, and more grace than anyone in that room had offered her. She had sat through questions meant to shrink her. She had listened to my mother dress cruelty as concern. And still, she answered with dignity. "I won't ask you to respect me," Zara said quietly, "but I will not sit here while you teach your son to disrespect himself." Those words reached a place in me I had kept locked for years. I touched Grandma Lenora's watch without thinking, the cracked glass pressed against my thumb. Then I stood. "Do not call my wife that." Mom's eyes widened. "She is not your wife unless we allow it." There it was, the real sentence under every argument. This had never only been about Zara. It was about permission. It was about my mother believing my adult life still belonged to the room where she sat judging it. Dad looked down at his hands. Dacre's mouth pulled into a satisfied line, like Mom had finally said what they all meant. Sable watched me, waiting for the old Tavian to return. But the old Tavian was tired. I looked at my mother. "You are not protecting this family. You are trying to own it." Her voice sharpened. "If you walk out with her, do not expect to come back here like nothing happened." Dad finally spoke. "Don't make a choice you can't undo." Dacre shook his head. "You're being stupid. You don't even know what you're throwing away." Sable added, "People will remember how you humiliated your parents." I heard all of them. Then I looked down at my keyring. The house key caught the lamplight. For years, I had mistaken that key for belonging. It let me enter when the sink leaked, when Dad needed a ride, when Mom wanted something fixed before company came. But sitting there, with Zara beside me and my mother's insult still hanging in the air, I finally understood. That key had not been keeping me connected. It had been keeping me available. My mother was still talking when I slipped the house key off the ring. Her words kept moving through the room, but they no longer reached me in full sentences. I heard pieces. Ungrateful. Embarrassing. Think of your father. Think of this family. I had thought about that family my whole life. That was the problem. I looked at Zara. Her face was calm, but I knew calm did not mean untouched. It only meant she had learned how to keep her dignity in rooms that did not deserve it. Dad sat in his recliner, saying nothing. Dacre waited near the fireplace, eyes narrowed, ready for me to fold. Sable watched like she was already rehearsing the version she would tell someone else later. My thumb brushed Grandma Lenora's watch. The cracked glass pressed against my skin, and her old words came back without effort. Being the youngest doesn't mean your life belongs last. I looked around that living room. I saw the ceiling fan I had balanced after Dacre said he was not handy. I saw the shelf near the hallway, the one I had mounted while Mom stood behind me saying it had to be perfect because company was coming. I saw the blood pressure machine I had helped Dad set up, the same machine Mom had used like a weapon 2 nights earlier. From the kitchen came the faint smell of pipe sealant. I had fixed almost everything in that house except the way they loved me. Mom pointed at Zara. You are making the biggest mistake of your life for a woman you barely understand. Dacre stepped in. Don't be stupid. You don't even know what she really is. He thought he was warning me. He had no idea how much he was revealing. I knew what Zara was. She was the woman who listened when I spoke. She was the woman who gave me room to decide. She was the woman who sat in that room without throwing her name, her work, or her success in their faces. She was the woman they failed before they even knew her. I removed the key and placed it on the coffee table beside Dad's pill bottle. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. Mom stopped mid-sentence. I said, "You'll notice me when things start breaking, and I'm not here to fix them." Dad looked at the key. I kept my voice steady. I can love you and still leave this house. Mom's face changed from anger to shock, as if she had never considered that love could come with a closed door. Tavian, she said, softer now, don't you dare make this ugly. You already did. Zara did not reach for my arm. She did not pull me toward the door. She stood beside me and let the choice belong to me. That mattered, because later I knew they would say she took me away. They would say she poisoned me, changed me, turned me against them. But the truth was simpler than that. I walked out because I could no longer stay and remain decent to myself. Before I reached the front door, I stopped. I need 10 minutes upstairs, I said. Only what belongs to me. Mom's mouth tightened. You are not clearing out this house like some thief. I am taking my documents and a few personal things. Nothing else. Dacre scoffed. Listen to yourself. So dramatic. I did not answer him. I went upstairs to the small room that still had a few boxes from my younger years. Zara waited near the bottom of the stairs. I knew she would come if I asked. I did not ask. Some things a man has to carry with his own hands. The room smelled faintly of dust and old cardboard. I opened the closet and took my birth certificate, social security card, passport, a folder of work certifications, 2 shirts, and a framed photo of Grandma Lenora sitting on the porch in a blue sweater. Then I found a box labeled Family Albums. Inside were pictures from cookouts, graduations, Christmas mornings. I was in most of them, but almost always at the edge, holding a cooler, carrying chairs, fixing something in the background while everyone else smiled at the camera. I closed the lid. I did not take that box. Some memories are not memories. They are instructions you finally stop obeying. Downstairs, I found a notepad near the kitchen phone and wrote one sentence carefully. I paid the utilities through the end of the month. After that, please call someone else. I left the note beside the key. Mom read it and pressed her lips together so hard they nearly disappeared. So that's it? She asked. You walk out and punish your parents? I am done being used, I said, not done being human. Outside, the night air did not feel like freedom. It felt cold. I stood beside my truck for a moment, looking at the house where I learned to ride a bike, where Grandma Lenora once shelled peas on the porch, where every holiday had been arranged around Mom's rules and Dad's silence. The right choice can still hurt. Zara came to stand beside me. "Are you sure?" she asked. I looked at the key ring in my palm. It felt strange without the weight of that old brass key. For the first time, yes. We drove back to Atlanta without music. At Zara's place she made tea, and I sat at her kitchen table with my phone face down beside the mug. I expected messages. I expected Mom to use Dad's health again. I expected Dacre to call me foolish and Sable to call me cruel in some careful, polished way. None of that fear disappeared, but something had changed. The key to my parents' house was no longer in my pocket. My availability finally had an ending. Zara and I still planned to marry. The ceremony was small, already arranged, nothing grand. I thought leaving the key behind would be the hardest thing I ever did. Then my mother's name lit up my phone on the morning I was supposed to marry Zara. The first 2 chairs at the Fulton Courthouse garden were empty, and my phone would not stop glowing in my coat pocket. The ceremony was never meant to be grand. Zara and I had planned it before the dinner, before the kitchen door, before my mother turned my father's health into a leash. We wanted a marriage, not a production. There were no tall flower arrangements, no string quartet, no row of photographers waiting for a perfect shot, just a small garden, clean morning light, a few people who had chosen to show up, and Zara standing beside me in a cream dress that made the whole place feel quiet. Harlan Pike stood near the back with his hands folded in front of him. He had polished his shoes for the occasion, and for some reason that nearly undid me. The 2 front chairs stayed empty. I had told myself I expected it. Expecting pain does not make it gentle. My phone lit up again. "Mom." I did not answer. Then the message came. "Your father's chest hurts again. Are you proud?" My hand tightened around the phone before I could stop it. I knew the pattern now. I had seen the numbers. I had checked the facts. Still, fear moved through me like an old command. Zara saw my face change. She did not ask to read the message. She did not tell me to ignore my father. She simply placed her hand over mine. "If it is an emergency," she said softly, "they should call 911. That sentence gave me something solid to stand on. I typed one line to Dacre. "If Dad has chest pain, call 911 now. Do not text me instead." Then I turned the phone face down. Harlan stepped closer, his voice low. "You want me to keep those seats open?" I looked at the chairs. For a moment I saw Mom sitting there, crying in a way that made people forgive her before they knew the facts. I saw Dad with his hands folded, silent as always. I saw myself as the youngest son, still leaving room for people who had not left room for me. Then I looked at the people standing behind us. Zara's friend from the foundation, one of my coworkers, an older woman from Zara's church group who had hugged me like she meant it. Harlan, wearing those polished shoes. "No," I said, "give them to someone who came to bless us." Harlan nodded once. 2 people moved forward and sat down. It should have felt like a loss. Instead, it felt like the room had finally told the truth. When the ceremony began, my hand was not steady. Zara noticed and smiled, not like she was pitying me, but like she was reminding me I was still there. I touched Grandma Lenora's watch before I signed the license. I did not marry Zara because of money. I did not marry her to punish my family. I married her because she saw the man in me before my own parents stopped seeing the boy they could send on errands. After we signed, Zara leaned close and asked, "Are you all right?" I looked across the garden, where the empty seats were no longer empty. "I don't know," I said, "but I know I'm where I'm supposed to be." She held my hand, and for that one small stretch of morning, nobody called me selfish. Nobody told me to fix anything. Nobody asked me to shrink love into obedience. Later that afternoon, the world my family thought they understood cracked open. I was not in their living room when it happened, but I learned enough from Dacre's frantic messages, Sable's sudden silence online, and my mother's voicemails to picture it clearly. Dacre sent the link first. Is this her? No congratulations. No apology. Just that. The article headline read, Self-made billionaire Zara Vay announces $250 million Atlanta education fund. Under it was a photo of my wife standing at a podium with the Vay Meridian Foundation banner behind her. The article mentioned Vay Global Equity, national partnerships, and an education initiative across Atlanta. It also included one quiet sentence near the end. Zara Vay recently married Tavian Rook in a private ceremony. They could have searched her name any day they wanted. They did not, because they believed they already knew enough to look down on her. Dacre called twice. I let it ring. Then came a message. You could have told us who she really was. I stared at those words for a long moment. Who she really was. Not kind, not patient, not the woman who brought cobbler to a house full of people prepared to judge her. Important, useful, powerful enough to matter. I imagined Dacre standing in my parents' living room, reading the article again. Sable probably stopped talking first. Dad likely adjusted his glasses and asked if that was the same woman from dinner. And Mom, I knew, would go still. Not with regret. Not yet. Calculation always arrived first with her. A voicemail came from Mom just before sunset. Tavian, we need to talk. There has clearly been a misunderstanding. That was all I needed to hear. They did not call because they were sorry. They called because they had finally learned the value of the woman they had tried to throw away. And somewhere in that house, I knew one of them had said it. That's her? Yes, that was her. The woman they called poor. The woman they thought did not belong. The woman they believed needed their approval to stand beside me. She had never needed their permission. And now, for the first time, they were beginning to understand that neither did I. By the second week after the wedding, the first thing to break in my parents' house was the kitchen sink. I heard about it from Dacre, not because he cared about the sink, but because he wanted me to understand the inconvenience. Mom says water is leaking under the cabinet again. You really going to let Dad deal with that? I looked at the message while standing in Zara's kitchen, waiting for coffee to finish brewing. The old version of me would have grabbed my keys before the second drip hit the floor. This time I set the phone down. A few hours later, another message came. Garage door is stuck halfway. Great timing, Tavian. By Friday, the porch light was flickering. Dad had a checkup, and nobody wanted to rearrange a meeting, a lunch, or a client call to drive him. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things I had quietly handled for so long that everyone mistook my effort for background noise. Then Mrs. Mavis Bell stopped by their porch. I know because Mom mentioned it in a voicemail she probably meant to sound casual. Mavis asked if you had been by lately, Mom said. I told her you've been busy. I did not tell her you abandoned your father after marrying into money. I paused the message right there. There it was. Not apology, not regret. A new story being built board by board. At the same time, Dacre had his own problem. After the news about Zara's education fund spread, he researched Vay Global Equity like a man searching for a side door. He had a redevelopment proposal, something he had been bragging about for months. Suddenly he realized Zara's foundation network touched the same people he wanted to impress. He sent emails, made calls, used words like alignment, impact, and community partnership. Then Ione Mercer's reply came through. Dacre forwarded it to me with no greeting. Due to a conflict of values and documented discriminatory remarks, we will not be moving forward. Below that, Dacre wrote, You could have told us who she really was. I read that sentence twice. Who she really was. They had known she was kind. They had known she was patient. They had known she sat in their house and tried to be respectful while they measured her coat, her ring, and her skin. They just had not known she was useful. That evening, Mom called again. Her voice had changed, softer, thinner. the voice she used when she wanted people to think she had been wounded. "Tavian, I have not slept," she said. "Your father is hurt. This whole thing got out of hand. We were confused. We were overwhelmed. We did not know who she was." I stopped the voicemail. Zara was across the room, reviewing notes for a foundation event. She looked up, not asking, only waiting. I played the rest. Mom continued, "Maybe Zara could sit down with Dacre. Nothing formal, just family talking. It would mean so much. It would show everyone we are trying to heal." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. "They didn't apologize to my wife," I said. "They applied for access." Zara closed her folder. "What do you want to do?" That was the difference between her and my mother. Mom asked questions that came with traps. Zara asked and let the answer belong to me. Before I could decide, Sable made her move. A screenshot arrived from Dacre. "Some people forget who raised them the moment they marry money. Praying for elderly parents left behind during a health scare. No names, no direct accusation, just enough for Marietta Ridge to understand, just vague enough to deny." Dacre added, "Fix this before it reaches Zara's foundation event. People are asking questions." I sat with the phone in my hand and felt the old pull. Explain, defend, calm everyone down, make the room comfortable for people who had never cared whether I could breathe in it. If I answered in anger, they would call me cruel. If I stayed silent, they would call it truth. So I did neither. I saved the screenshot. I saved the voicemail. I saved Dacre's message, not to attack them, to remind myself what they were really doing when the flowers arrived. Because the flowers did arrive. The next afternoon, Elowyn Price from the foundation called Zara while we were finishing lunch. "There are 4 visitors in the lobby asking for you and Mr. Rook," she said. "They say they are family. One of them has a bouquet and one has a folder." Zara looked at me. She did not sigh. She did not roll her eyes. She did not tell me to hide. "What do you want to do?" she asked again. I thought about the key on the table, the empty chairs at the courthouse, Grandma Lenora's watch ticking softly against my wrist. "They still believe the word family opens every door," I said. Then I stood. They had walked into Vay Meridian Foundation with flowers in their hands and access in their eyes, still believing my wife's kindness was a stage they could use. They were about to learn the door had a list. Elowyn Price looked down at the reception list, then back at my mother's expensive bouquet and said, "I'm sorry, I don't see your names on today's schedule." The lobby of Vay Meridian Foundation was bright, quiet, and clean in a way my parents' living room had never been. Not because it was richer, because it had order, purpose, a place for everything. On the wall behind the reception desk, a banner read, "Every child deserves dignity." I almost laughed when I saw that later, not because it was funny, but because dignity was the one thing my family had never known how to give unless status came first. Mom stood at the desk holding a white bouquet wrapped in gold ribbon. Dad wore an old Navy suit that made him look smaller than I remembered. Dacre had a leather folder tucked under one arm, angled behind his leg like hiding it changed what it was. Sable stood beside him, polished and tense, scanning the lobby as if trying to see who might recognize her. Mom softened her voice. "We're family." Elowyn stayed professional. "I understand, ma'am, but this is a scheduled event." "We only came to apologize," Mom said. "My son Tavian is here. Zara is our daughter-in-law." Dacre leaned in. "There's been a misunderstanding. We just need 5 minutes." Sable added, "Before people get the wrong idea." That was what they always cared about. Not the harm, the appearance of harm. Elowyn sent a message back to the event area. I was standing with Zara near a table of program folders when my phone buzzed. 4 visitors in the lobby. They say they are your family." Zara read my face before I said a word. "Do you want me with you?" she asked. I looked toward the hallway that led to the lobby. I could already feel the old pull, that trained instinct to manage everyone before anyone made a scene. No, I said, not because I'm ashamed, because this is my boundary to set. I won't let them turn your work into their stage. She touched my sleeve once. I'll be right here. When I stepped into the lobby, all four of them turned. For one short breath, I saw them the way I used to. My mother, my father, my older brother, my sister-in-law. People whose voices had shaped the rooms inside me. Then I saw the bouquet, the folder, the careful close, the same expectation that I would smooth the carpet before they walked over it. Mom moved first. "Tavian," she said, almost tearful, "we didn't know. We didn't know she was all this." That was the sentence that ended whatever small hope I had left. Not, "We were wrong." Not, "We hurt her." Not, "We judged her before we knew her." Just, "We didn't know she was important." I looked at my mother and kept my voice low. "You needed her resume before you could find her humanity." The lobby went still. Elowen looked down at her screen. Dacre's jaw tightened. Sable's eyes dropped to the flowers. Dad stared at the floor as if the tile had suddenly become interesting. Mom's eyes filled. "We're your parents. You were my parents when you called my wife trash, too." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then she tried the old door. "Your father has been under terrible stress." I turned to Dad. "If you need medical help, I will always hope you get it. I checked before. I cared then and I care now. But I will not be controlled by fear anymore." Dad's face changed. Maybe shame, maybe anger, maybe just the discomfort of being named clearly. Dacre stepped forward with the folder. "My proposal was rejected unfairly. I only wanted a chance to explain. You could help fix that." "No," I said. "Your proposal failed because of your values, not because of my marriage." "That's not how business works," he said. "That is exactly how trust works." Sable finally spoke. "People are asking why you hid your own parents after marrying into money." I looked at her. "You wanted people to misunderstand because the truth made you look exactly like what you were." She had no polished answer for that. Mom lowered the bouquet a few inches. "So what do you want from us?" "The truth," I said. "If you want to apologize, write it. No audience, no proposal, no blood pressure machine, just the truth." Dacre closed the folder. Dad looked away. Mom held the flowers like they had suddenly become heavy. "And Zara?" she asked. "Zara owes you nothing." The words did not come from anger. That surprised me. They came from a place steadier than anger. "You don't get access to my life just because we share blood," I said. "You don't get to insult my wife when you think she has nothing, then bring flowers when you learn what she owns." Nobody moved. I turned and walked back toward the event area. No one shouted. No security dragged anyone out. The doors simply closed behind me. That was enough. Later that evening, Zara and I went home without celebrating. She understood that peace can still hurt when it comes with a closed chapter. I placed our new house key on the kitchen counter beside Grandma Lenora's old watch. The cracked glass caught the light over the stove. For years, that watch had felt like a warning. Don't put your life last. Don't mistake usefulness for love. Don't let people call control family. That night, it felt like a promise finally kept. Maybe one day my mother will write a letter that does not ask for anything. Maybe one day I will read it. I still love my family from a distance, but distance is part of my peace now. Forgiveness is one thing. Access is another. Have you ever had to love someone from a distance just to protect your peace? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. For the first time in my life, I was not the son standing last in line for love. I was a husband, a man, and finally, someone who knew which doors deserved a key.